Hello everybody. The disembodied voice that you can hear is Rob Burton from Mindstain Comics, and indeed we have another Mindstainer here, Miss Sarah Peploe, who is the author and indeed artist as well of the series Damaris, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. I haven't seen you in ages. So I suppose the first question has to be, what is Damaris about?
Damaris is a historical comic set during the Bawdy House riots of 1668, which was when a group of men, contemporary reports said up to 40,000, whether that is actually true or not, or that was hugely over-exaggerated, maybe, not sure. But anyway, a lot of men went around the red light districts of the time, attacking sex workers and invading brothels. Nominally, this was supposed to be a protest against a law that had just been passed banning conventicles, which were like private religious ceremonies. So the idea was it was born of resentment that, this had been made illegal, whereas sex work, which was also illegal, was still kind of carrying on. But as with a lot of things that claim to have some kind of, moral element, but are really just misogyny and men attacking women who they see as a legitimate target. Spoilers, it was about that. Where it sort of went on for a few days over the Easter weekend of that year. And apparently it had been this kind of weird tradition that mostly apprentices who were, according to contemporary reports, most but not all of the men doing this would sort of do this ceremonial attack on sex work establishments as a kind of Puritan revolt.
Wow, so there was a sort of a strong sense of sort of ritual about it in some sense.
Yeah, weirdly, but this year it was particularly vicious, particularly populous.
How did you find out about the Bawdy House Road?
This is quite convoluted. I was listening to a song by Patrick Wolf called Damaris, which is sort of very Patrick Wolfian kind of, lovelorn song about a dead woman called Damaris. And then I just thought Damaris was a cool name. So I looked it up and found famous Damarises. And one of the women mentioned was Damaris Page, who was a entrepreneur, sex worker, brothel owner, property developer off the back of the money she made from sex work in the 1660s. And was reading about this, the initial attack, and then the fact that one of the facts that she's sort of renowned for was post the riots, a satire was released which was nominally co-written by her and by not Pris Fotheringham, sorry, I'm getting like high-profile madams mixed up, and Elizabeth Cresswell, who was another very successful madam of the time, wrote this supposedly wrote this satirical petition called the Poor Whores Petition, in which they addressed Lady Castlemaine, who was one of Charles II's mistresses, and so it was this kind of, from two whores to another. Can you help us out? It is, this was a time of sort of various satires, petitions, broadsides. It is, hugely possible that they didn't write this. They were just well-known women, so their names were attached to it by whoever wrote it. But I just found it kind of interesting, the possibilities of it, as something I could write a story about. And then going back to Patrick Wolf and him being kind of, I don't know if that's the right pronouns, but being, gorgeous and red-haired and slightly puppyish. And then reading about yet another sort of restoration sex worker and sex work adjacent heroine, Nell Gwynn. And then reading that apparently she used to cross-dress, for want of a better word, present as male, off stage as well as on, and apparently done that for years. And all these things just sort of coalesced in my brain. And
it sounds like you did quite a lot of research for this. I mean, how did you go about that?
I was reading the petition itself, which is pretty short, and it's available on Wikipedia, worth a read. So that for a start. There was just reading contemporary sort of things about sex work, which very often, obviously, the women who actually do it are completely absent from them. It's just the kind of the client or the sort of the person condemning them's attitude to them. But you sort of like get the feel of the attitudes of the time, which is, depressing but useful. Pepys's diary, of course, what a dick, but, invaluable for the kind of the sense of the time, the place, of the class that he was operating in. What else? There was a couple of kind of contemporary broadsides about Damaris page herself, and one from a death that kind of described the mythologized version of her, biographies about Nell Gwynn, books about the theatre of the time, of course, because this like early days of the Restoration, or early-ish days of the Restoration, and this kind of tension between the sort of liberalizing in terms of things like the theatre and pubs, this sort of old Puritan influence that was still kind of erupting and was absolutely a factor in the riots. Also that it, I call it liberalism, but that's pretty fucking relative. This was still a brutal, stratified society, which I hope I've conveyed. And yeah.
On that kind of following those themes through culture, one of the things that you mentioned, you did some sort of you had an interest in sort of sex work in a more modern context as well, and how it, and I suppose an awful lot of that is there are some very, very contemporary themes. How do you think that attitudes have changed over time between sort of then and now? What has changed and what remains the same?
Depressingly, a lot has stayed the same. This fury that seems to exist about the concept of women charging for what, overwhelmingly women charging for what some men think they should be entitled to for free, entirely on their terms. And that has remained, that, particular loathing and contempt that a certain kind of misogynist man has for sex workers. You see it everywhere, in in people's conversations online. So yeah, depressingly, that's still there. And I don't know, this sort of, the idea of the sex working woman as like a legitimate target or a barrier. Like you'll see, say, if some terrible man who's been, accused of family, something massive just fell over in our kitchen. Would it be all right if I just went and check?
I think we'll just sort of just cut for now and see whether or not somebody's died. Yeah, that's
cool.
Just to sort of get back into it, I suppose, two questions. One, was that noise a horrible Puritan misogynist trying to gain entry into your house in order to murder you? And secondly, what are you drinking?
No, it was some pans and just lager.
Fair enough. Okay, so
quite a dollar.
really, there's only sort of one thing left that I really want to ask you, which is just about the creative process and how you go about doing it more than anything else. How tightly, you have a plan ahead of time. I know that you plan to do it in segments and such. You can just talk about that. That'd be great.
Yeah, I wrote the script first. So I remember kind of writing notes to myself, and there is a particular phrase in the Poor Whores petition, as it's called, which, as I said, absolutely could have been just written as a sort of mean-spirited anti-Catholic satire by some bloke, and that very probably, I say probably, but very possibly is what happened. But there was this one phrase, which I won't spoil it out, you have to read it, which did strike me. And I thought, I just remember writing down, that could have been from, a sex workers' rights literature from 2015. And I didn't publish the comic till 2016. I was doing lots of kind of writing notes. There were I always write things in the wrong order. There were kind of beats from different points in the story that I knew I wanted to hit, so I would kind of write those and flesh those out and be like, oh shit, I've got to fit sort of 30 pages in between this and that, but I've got these lovely bits. So I was, I would mostly have the script down, and then I would be drawing it. In the process between, drawing and lettering, sometimes the shapes of things would change. I'd have an idea of, say, how to frame an image or a scene differently. And then it would be just kind of going back to the script itself to move things around. But I thought, because it was just me, I could rely on myself and be a fuck up, which I do quite a lot of. So it felt kind of good just having this thing entirely in my hands, and knowing that I wasn't sort of, I don't know, inconveniencing another artist, that I could just kind of play with it and piss about with it indefinitely if I wanted, which is something I haven't done.
I know what you mean. There is a sort of a weird pressure to write very tightly when you know that somebody else is going to have to deal with your musings.
Yeah,
it is quite freeing in that sense.
Yeah.
I know one of the themes that we always touch upon when we're talking about the comic is the kind of the violence of it, and the way that you totally don't back off on that. And I think that's one of the piece's sort of better aspects in some ways. I did wonder if you what your touchstone to that kind of stuff was. I mean, we often talk about Quentin Tarantino in the period drama.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this. It's because Tarantino, he wrote the screenplay for Natural Born Killers, but then it was changed quite drastically when Oliver Stone made the film. I think Tarantino got a story credit, but there's this really nice line in the original screenplay where they have the actress who plays Mallory Knox, the one half of the sort of serial killing team of Mickey and Mallory, who are the main characters. There's the actress who plays her in the film within the film. It's just has this nice line where she's talking about her process. And she says, if you depict someone in a film getting decapitated, most people think cool, because for most people it's not part of your lived experience to witness a decapitation for most people. But if you show someone getting a paper cut, everyone squirms because everyone can relate to that. And what I think, she doesn't say that the trick is combining the two, which is something I think Tarantino does really well. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I think he makes, graphic violence very kind of upsettingly present in a way that it often isn't in the more kind of sterile action films. You know, say a superhero film, you can see a building get demolished and it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so that's what I try to do, like depict the kind of the gore, and then the sort of the human kind of cost, the effect of it. Try and do that thing as well of, I don't know if I've succeeded at this, but like, you know, I'm writing kind of issue to issue, and you know, it's taken me years, but this is all kind of taking place in, you know, one night. So trying to portray the kind of I suppose the degeneration, like as bruises swell and exhaustion sets in.
Yeah.
And I think you need to sort of show the kind of, if you're going to show violence, I would argue in a sense it's far more moral to show the kind of filth and misery and viscera of it than to make it this kind of awesome explosion, even if it's being enacted on a character we hate.
Yeah.
Or if you do have it being a big, like, satisfying moment, then something kind of comes in to complicate that.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's been, I think, really interesting hearing you talk about all this. Yeah. And for everybody watching, I suggest that you take that interest and turn it into buying Sarah's book. There are, 5 parts, and all of them definitely worth reading. In fact, what you should do definitely is just buy all of them and read it straight through from begin to end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.